The first one is the F everything and run, which so many of us are prone to. But for a select few, it means something completely else. It means face everything and rise. And that was my commitment when creating that piece of art. Is
Hi, Julius.
Martin, how's it going?
Yeah, fine, thank you. Thank you very much for coming on today. It's really exciting to have new people on. Okay, Julius, so you're an artist, aren't you?
Yes, I am a fine artist, which means I do a lot more experimental work than commercial work. So it's a lot of on the cutting edge, but it's very fulfilling, and it's a lot different than what people think an artist is.
Okay, I was fascinated when I went through your website on your intro. You spoke about the story of the experience of the rock group Queen in South Africa. Can you tell me a bit more about that? I was always a big fan of Queen as a rock band when I was growing up, and it was seeing your testimony about that. Can you tell me more about that?
Of course. So, everybody's welcome to go have a look at the artist statement on my website. But before we get into that story, I want to share with you how it found me. I had recently added my event photography portfolio to a big photography website where labels and agencies go to find photographers. And as a result of that, somebody from BBC Three Scotland reached out to me and said, hey, we're doing a documentary on Queen and their concert in Johannesburg. We've got you on our database, and we were just wondering if you maybe had some insights or maybe some access to some of those photos so that we could include it in the documentary. And as luck would have it, I did. I had a few people I could reach out to, and I could put them in contact with people who had footage. But long story short, during this exercise, I started doing the math, and it works out that there's a really, really, really good chance that I was conceived during that concert. So Queen had 5 concerts scheduled in South Africa, and they could only perform 2. And my parents, who were married at the stage, were fortunate enough to attend one of those shows. But due to the boycotts and international sanctions people had against South Africa, there was a lot of political climate that didn't sit well with the band. And because of that, they had to cut the last 3 shows. So yeah, that's sort of like that experience, figuring out how I came to be, has explained so much, because that has set the tone for everything moving forward.
You also spoke an awful lot about personal trauma, and that's something that I've always found interesting, and also about how it's kind of it's guided you in your art and your career as an artist. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
So I was watching an interview with Dr. Amen. He's a really renowned brain physician, and he had a discussion about brain health. And during one of his interviews, he explained something called the ACE, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it is a scorecard of 1 to 10. So you go through this list of questions, 10 questions, and for every one of those that you answer in the affirmative, you have to give yourself a point. So I'm not going to go too deep into those questions, but when doing that exercise, I realized that I had an ACE score of 6. And then Dr. Amen went on to explain that people with these high ACE scores have a lot of trauma. And if they don't proactively process that trauma, it has the potential to severely shorten their lifespan, in some instances up to 40%. Meaning, if you were to live on average to 100 years, because of your unresolved trauma, you would only get 60 if you lived a physically healthy life. And that really struck a chord with me, because I had a look at so many of the people in my family and my close circle and did a kind of questionnaire on their behalf, being like, oh, okay, maybe they went through something like this or something like that. And I had a look at how many of them were affected by those traumas, meaning how many of them suffered with things like obesity or addiction or just detachment. And I realized that I was falling prey to the adverse reactions of unprocessed trauma. So in Dr. Amen's interview, he talks about how do we resolve trauma. And the long and short of it is our bodies store trauma in the nervous system. And when we don't process it, it erupts. well, maybe not interrupts, it's always running in your nervous system. So it can come out of nowhere and be like, ha, trauma event, let's have a chocolate, or trauma, let's have a pint, or whatever the case might be. And the only solution to processing that trauma is to create a space for your nervous system to process that trauma. So you'll see something like this happen pretty often at a rehabilitation center, for example, or a retreat, where people create a safe space for people to feel those emotions, to give your nervous system the opportunity to fully process and accept a traumatic event. And once you've done that, it calms the nervous system. It gives you the opportunity to solve sort of like that anxiety, let it go, um, and re-enter your day-to-day life without that trauma circulating your nervous system. And that's what I've been doing with my art. Whenever there's something that shows up that brings anxiety or makes me feel uncomfortable, I've cultivated a sense of mindfulness and discipline to sit down and allow myself the opportunity to process the trauma, to sit with it, to say, okay, I'm sad. Why am I sad? And then either write about it or go take photos while I'm sad, or a number of things, listening to sad music. But the long and short of it is I have to allow my nervous system to process these feelings. Otherwise, these feelings are going to control me.
Really associate that with that, Julius. It's something that I've learned to do in my lifetime. I think, it's talking about traumas. I often think it's not about what that trauma is, it's about how that trauma affects us. So, people have all sorts of kind of stories about what may have happened. It's not it's not insignificant. It's the point of it, how it affects you and how we process it. So, and also, the other thing I'm thinking about, you're talking about you do your digital art that you do, and art comes in various different forms, doesn't it? It comes in music, it comes in written word, it comes in poetry, it comes in sort of stuff you see on stage, all those sorts of things. And I've always found, I'm a musician myself, so I play in a band, and I found that actually playing music is very therapeutic. And
Definitely.
also journaling and writing things down are really
Yes.
okay.
So, I
So
mean, you being an artist, you're aware of sort of like the phenomenon associated with it. Whatever your field of discipline may be, it's not the instrument. So it's not the guitar that makes the artist, it's the artist himself. That's the instrument. And life is sort of like sharing its wisdom with you and asking you to go on a journey with the universe. And then it's sort of like a divine covenant of sorts. You go into an agreement where life says, okay, Julius, I'll show you something really amazing, something interesting, something insightful, something that's going to liberate you and help others. But here are the terms. You have to share that story with other people. And that's where I find myself now. I've had an amazing career so far, and I've been neglecting my part of the commitment, sharing my story, sharing the insights that life has shared with me with people like yourselves and your audiences. And that's why we're here. We're here because I want to share those insights with anybody who's willing to listen. So I noticed in the application form you sent through that this is a question that you'd like to ask your audiences. So it's going to be a combination of like an instant response, but also something that I've given a lot of thought of or a lot of thought to. And the short answer is something that gives me peace is a certainty in the divine that everything is happening for a reason, and that life will not send something my way that I can't handle. And that's a bit of a weird thing for me to admit, because years ago, while I was growing up and still finding myself, I found the thought of a supreme being or a deity or whatever a bit far-fetched. But now, having lived as long as I've lived and seen what I've seen, and experience what I've experienced, all these little miracles day after day, I can't help but surrender to that idea that yes, there is a divine being, there is a source, there's a universe out there that cares deeply about me and it wants me to grow, it wants me to succeed. And that thought gives me an enormous amount of peace. It makes me feel less overwhelmed because I'm no longer in it alone. I'm just here to learn and grow and express and share, and everything else is out of my hands. And there's a kind of freedom that comes with that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, the next thing I wanted to ask you about is was looking at your website and looking at some of your art, and one of the pieces of art that really caught my eye was the one that says Fear or F.E.A.R. And it was reading about it. I just, what inspired you to create that piece of art? Because that's the one that caught my eye.
Yeah. So with so many of my photos, they have a very long process. I took that photo maybe in 2016, 2017, and only created the artwork around 2019, 2020. I believe I created the Fear piece during lockdown. So when we were all at home for 2 years. And it was important for me to create a bit of inspiration amongst my fellow creatives because the FEAR acronym can be interpreted two ways. The first one is the if everything and run, which so many of us prone to. But for a select few, it means something completely else. It means face everything and rise. And that was my commitment when creating that piece of art is I would I would go through whatever life was asking me to go through, but I will resolve to coming out of it a stronger, healthier, happier person. And that's what I want to try and get across with these pieces of art. You're a musician, how much it helps, not just yourself, but others. So maybe you wrote a love song or a song about a relationship that didn't work out or the loss of a loved one. And that experience helped you process, helped you deal with the encounter. So that's the art healing the artist. But now there's this wonderful benefit that people don't tell you about, and that's when your art heals the audience. And that's what I aspire to do with my art, is to allow people the opportunity to heal, give them permission to say, hey, it's okay to work on yourself. It's okay to take some time out, step back, and process whatever's going through your nervous system. Because in doing so, you are giving yourself the opportunity to a longer, fuller, more meaningful life. And I feel like that's the core behind most of the artwork, if not all the artwork that I do, is I want people to invite mindfulness into their safe spaces, into their sanctuaries, whether that be home, office, family. I want them to always be reminded that there is a guiding force and that there is um, the opportunity to heal.
And you mentioned mindfulness, so I'm interested to know how you discovered that and how that came about for you.
So it's a series of unfortunate events. I moved down from Johannesburg to KwaZulu-Natal. I knew that I was going to be taking on a lot of responsibility. And even in preparation of all that, I still had issues with stress. So in an effort to manage that, I started doing yoga. I started going to a chiropractor for adjustments. I had a whole bunch of mindfulness. Well, I call it mindfulness now, but a whole bunch of philosophical practices that I was practicing in anticipation of the responsibility that was heading my way. And I think it was maybe 2 or 3 months in with my chiropractor at that stage where I went in for an adjustment and she couldn't help me. She sat me aside and said, "You are way too tense. If I do any adjustments on you now, I'm going to hurt you." And that is a bad place to be. So at her recommendation, she asked that I humor her and go check out this place in Ikopo, which was about a 3-hour drive from where I was staying, called the Buddhist Retreat Center. And there I found ample guidance. I was given the opportunity to lay such a beautiful foundation for what would lie ahead. And my first retreat to the Buddhist Retreat Center was an event called Photography as Meditation. And the entire weekend, we had to go around this farm, this beautiful sanctuary with our cameras with specific assignments in mind. For example, take photos of these shapes, circles, squares, triangles. What does crunchy look like? What does sweetness look like? It's asking you all sorts of abstract questions about your reality that you would never sort of like ask yourself. And it's asking you to focus, it's asking you to pay attention. And that was my introduction to like the whole mindfulness of it all. And when I got back to the office on Monday, it had such a profound effect on me that I went ahead and I booked 9 months of workshops in advance at the Buddhist Retreat Center. And through all the different kinds of workshops, the people I got to meet, the guided meditation, the yoga retreats, the healthy eating, the solitude, all these wonderful Eastern practices that I'm not privy to as a Afrikaans young man, just ended up guiding me. It gave me the permission to find my own path, to decide on specific things for myself, and it eliminated a lot of that existential dread. And for me, that's mindfulness. The ability to be here now, to be in the present, to avoid depression. So depression is classified in the Eastern philosophy as a time sickness. It means that you are stuck in the past. And anxiety also is classified as a time sickness, meaning you are in the future. You're worried about the future. So if you have anxiety, you're stressed about the future. And if you have depression, there's something in your past that's holding you back. And the only solution to that is to be here now, to cultivate a sense of mindfulness, to be in the moment, because when you are here, you have control. Well, a limited amount of control, but at least you can react. You can participate in the now. But if I'm constantly living in a state of anxiety, worried about the future, I'm letting life pass me by. And that dishonors myself, dishonors the relationship that I have with those closest to me. And yeah, that's what mindfulness is for me. Being here now, and experiencing the fullness of life, whatever sort of like it may be.
That's a brilliant description of mindfulness. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 10 years, kind of sort of similar sort of experience, and for knowing all those things. And I now actually, I run classes for mindfulness. Did when I was before I retired, I was running mindfulness in the workplace as a drugs and alcohol counselor. And over the years, it's quite amazing, dramatic changes in people, seeing how people were really very, very highly stressed, and to actually just within a few minutes, with that connection of people talking to each other or listening and just being in the same place at the same time, it has an amazing effect on people. And one of the greatest joys I get with that is seeing people kind of walk away, walk out the room, or walk home and feeling lifted, feeling much lighter, as if burdens have just rolled away. And that's the absolute beauty of it. So I'm a massive advocate of it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
quite something. Yes. Okay.
What you're touching on there reminds me of a concept that really, like, it reshaped the way that I wanted to approach life. In Buddhist philosophy, there's this teaching of priceless. There are things in life that money can't buy. And those things look like healthy relationships, or a healthy body, or a good reputation, or a good night's sleep. There are things that life can give you that you can't buy. And that has been the main objective. It's been one of my biggest pursuits in life, is finding those priceless experiences, whether that be in myself, whether that be with my camera out in the field. That's what I want to relay to the audiences, is there are priceless experiences. There are things out there that are kind of in your control that you can cultivate, that's going to give you the best quality of life. And it all starts with being mindful and being in the present. Yeah. Um, my mom is an empath, so I think I got that from her, meaning that we have an innate ability to feel, but also to put ourselves in other people's shoes. So I was listening to an interview on the Lost Boys. This is something that happening in the UK right now, is men don't have any good role models, and there's like a whole thing happening. And one of the suggestions the speaker was making is that men immerse themselves in narrative, in fictional stories. So step away from the textbooks and the business books and how to be an entrepreneur, and instead, cultivate that empathy by reading a book of fiction, because for the next 300 pages, you're going to be forced to look at life through somebody else's eyes, whether that be male or female, a wizard or a knight or somebody in the cave era, that ability to experience life from somebody else's perspective, that's what empathy is for me. And it's a tool that can be cultivated. It's a skill that you can develop. And I feel like narrative, again, narrative being an art form, is a is a tool that lends itself perfectly to anybody who wants to build that muscle.
No, I never thought of empathy as being something that you can experience through reading a book in that way. And I get that now. I already understand that now, because if we lose ourselves in a novel, I grew up a massive fan of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, and hence the beard. So, was that actually going into, and sometimes watching movies and actually kind of almost living it yourself. And I also think that again is a kind of mindfulness, is a kind of actually letting go of thoughts about the mundane of yesterday and tomorrow, and just escaping, having an escapism into another world, which when we come out of it, then it's almost like a release. We've kind of let go of all the stress perhaps. And
Yes.
because we kind of intrinsically know that it's not real, it is just a fantasy. It can be so much fun, can't it?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up escapism because I feel like I've had a front row ticket to study it up close as a photographer. So, just to give your audience a bit of a background, in about 2013, I went on a 2-week holiday to Ibiza and I packed my camera. And while there, I met a gentleman who needed a photographer. He said, "Well, I can't pay you, but I can give you access to all the clubs. I can give you a place to sleep and I have a car with some fuel so I can drive you around." And that 2-week holiday turned into a 3-month adventure and eventually into like a 7-year long photography assignment where I got to see Ibiza in its fullest form. Because as a photographer, you get access to the nightclubs, yes, of course, but you also get to photograph the high end restaurants. You get to do the fashion shoots with the designers and the models. You get to cover the mindfulness retreats, and you get to see the entire ecosystem. And what it comes down to is Ibiza is the mecca of escapism. People go there to escape. They want to escape boring jobs, boring relationships, the mundane. Whatever you want to escape from, you can find that in Ibiza. And that's not to say that escapism is unhealthy. I think escapism is very healthy, but in small doses. And what I mean by that is during my observations, this journey that I was on, I got to see what happens when there's an imbalance, when people get addicted to that escapism. So they form an identity of, I'm a dark techno clubber, and that's just what my entire life is going to be like. Or the inverse, I'm the yogi, the Reiki, everything is vegetarian and natural and what have you. And these are all forms of escapism that are holding us from being in the present. So, long story short, in my 7-year endeavor, I got to meet a handful of people who had figured it out. So, these are people that were attending maybe one or two events and were doing some yoga and all the things, but they had figured out that if they build lives that they do not have to escape from, if they build lives that they enjoy, that they love, that fulfill them, you only need a little bit of escapism. And that's been an ideal that I've strived for like ever since. I'm very hands-on in the lifestyle design space. And I would encourage people to do that for themselves too, because that's the reality. If you don't have to escape your life, then things like addiction lose any of like loses all its power over you. So yeah, again, it comes back to being intentional and mindful and being present.
And I think it's also about achieving a balance, isn't it? There's something that I've kind of come to the conclusion is that too much of anything is not healthy for us. And
100%.
we see that, I think we see that in all walks of life. It doesn't matter what it is. Sometimes we say, oh, must be part of this belief system or that belief system, or I don't do this, or I don't, as you said, like being vegetarian or vegan or whatever that might be. An overload of it can be unhealthy.
Yes. Extremes are unhealthy. And this is sort of like the one of the synonyms for Buddhism, as they call it the middle path or the middle way, finding like a balance in between. And that's also very prevalent in yoga, which is also a bit of an Eastern practice. But the reality is like balance is essential. You touched on the piece of art called F.E.A.R, but that's from a collection called Shadow Work. And shadow work is inspired by Jung and his teachings about incorporating the darkest elements of ourselves. So maybe that sounds a little bit severe, but Jung hypothesized like there are shadows that live within the psyche that are there to protect us, that are there to help us. But modern society has forced us to abandon those instincts or those qualities. And what we do when we do shadow work is we go back into the psyche and we look at all the shadows, all the parts of ourselves that society has told us is impure or is incorrect. And we make friends with that. We make friends with those shadows. We make friends with those imperfections. And in doing so, we give ourselves the opportunity to live a full life. If I could give you a visual example, think of the quality of your life as a 24-hour day. So if you are somebody who hasn't done the shadow work, who is living with an unintegrated psyche, if you want to call it that, you are only affording yourself the opportunity to enjoy 12 hours of that day, the daylight of that day. But in doing the shadow work, in exploring those dark corners and befriending them, you are enriching your life twofold because now you get to enjoy the daytime and the nighttime. And I think that's another thing that Ibiza helped me with is being okay with the darkness, with the nighttime, because so much of what I was doing happened at night. And I feel like a richer, fuller, more balanced person as a result of that.
Yeah, I really hear that from you. And when I think about when I've had struggles with depression myself in the past, and actually coming to realize that actually when those things come along, they're there for a reason, and sometimes you just have to sit with it, and but trying to fight it and trying to get rid of it is actually just makes it even worse. Whereas there's an attitude of mind of actually, as you said, embracing it, embrace what it is,
Mm.
even when it's really, really uncomfortable. And be kind. We need to be kind to ourselves, and we need to be patient. And I found
Yeah,
that
you're right.
engaging in that patience with myself and the way my mind's working, eventually, I've said before, I call it getting on the bus. I can't get off the bus until it gets to its destination.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think what you're
that's
touching
where
on
that's coming from.
is compassion, having the compassion to sit with yourself and have an inner discussion with whatever is ailing you. So, a lot of us, we developed defense mechanisms that helped us when we were younger, when we were in different economic situations. And then as we mature, as we grow, those defenses are still up. And a healthy way to approach those is to befriend them, to sit down with them in your mind's eye and say, hi, depression, welcome. Welcome to my house. You can sit here as long as you need to. I want to thank you for all the times that you've aided me and protected me and helped me. But I also want you to understand that I don't need that much of you anymore. So you're always welcome to come visit, but please try and not stay. And having these weird, abstract internal conversations with your traumas, with your anxieties, whatever you might want to call it, that's also a form of processing or allowing the nervous system to process the unresolved. These are all little things that they should be teaching you in school, but they don't. You find it in the weirdest places.
Yeah, I think I'm a firm believer in that. There's something I think that's missing in schools now, and something else I'm very passionate about is concept of emotional intelligence and the way that we communicate with each other, getting away from the sort of the judgmental ways people communicate or the egotistical ways people communicate. And we see that very much in national and international politics. And I just think that maybe that if these people start to embrace emotional intelligence, then problems will be easily solved. Because I think if people then are getting offended in their communication, they're failing to hear what's being communicated. Because we communicate, we speak. We speak for a reason. We've got something to say. We want to be heard. And if we're not heard, then that's when things get a bit dangerous, I think. It's when we start to get
That's when
angry
the
and upset. you know.
That's when the violence gets in. Yeah. Like, oh, you don't want to listen to me? I'll show
Yeah,
you. I'll make you listen. Like, where are my sticks? Where's my fire? But yes, you're right.
yeah.
I do feel like there is a bit of an imbalance, but cultivating a sense of mindfulness or improving your emotional intelligence, I feel like that's the baseline. It's not that this is a new skill we have to acquire. This is something that we have to go back to and reconnect with. Because if we spend more time in nature, we get to experience sort of like all the entire emotional spectrum in the physical world. And I'll give you an example of this is I was at a funeral just after high school. A friend of mine had passed away, and I remember going to a botanical garden after the ceremony and feeling sad and just remorseful. And in the distance, there was a waterfall. And while looking at the waterfall, I felt like the waterfall was crying with me. And that's such an odd feeling, but because I am from nature and I am a part of nature, even though it feels maybe, even though we think it's abstract, it feels completely natural. The more time we spend in nature, the better connected we become with our emotions. And I think that's one of the key advantages I have having grown up in South Africa is we don't have all these huge cities. I mean, I grew up in suburban territories, but I was afforded the opportunity with so much nature, so many like animals and plant life, and just the rawness of life that I feel like when I speak to my first world counterparts, that is my competitive edge, is the fact that I still have that emotional capacity and I feel connected to life, to the world outside me, to the universe, to my brethren, all these people around me. That's what we're lacking these days, is that sense of connection.
Thank you, Julius. This has been fabulous. As we're going to draw to a close now, I always like to give people the opportunity to shamelessly promote themselves because I know, having looked at your website and seeing what you've done, how far you got, and part of this podcast is to part of my podcasting really is about that. It's about giving people the opportunity to, if they've got something going on for themselves or something they want to promote about themselves or about their business, then this is the opportunity to do so. So
All right,
fire
so
away.
let the shilling begin. Buy my art.
Yeah.
um, Look, I would be honored if people wanted to add my artwork to their collections. I've done an enormous amount of work to make sure that their investments are safe and sound, that everything that is authentic and authenticated and the paperwork is there. But like I mentioned earlier, for me, my desire is for you to have a priceless experience, a priceless life. And I package the art in such a way that it complements that objective. So if you are somebody who is dealing with fear, for example, then have a look at the piece called Fear. Bring it into your life. Make a intentional commitment to, instead of saying F everything and run, is I will commit to facing everything and rising. And there are so many of the pieces out there or in my collection that try and aid people with these different emotional exercises or exams or whatever you want to call them. And I want to include that when you buy these, I go the extra mile. So it's not that you just get the piece of art, is I give you a digital reminder of that. So the art can be worn on your smartwatch, on your smartphone, on your computer desktop, on your tablet. And more often than not, I'll have a one-on-one with you and we'll design a custom meditation. We'll figure out a mantra for you to exercise, to instill while you are in this chapter of your life. So that whenever you step into your sanctuary, you can be proud of yourself because you showed up, because you are here, because you've made a commitment towards healing. And that's what I want for everybody. I want them to live full lives and experience the fullness of this amazing journey. So, yeah, chill over.
And your website address is,
You can find my fine art at fineart.juliusjooste.com. That's FINEART.JULIUSJOOSTE.com. But also, I work with established creatives. So if you need a website designed, if you want to onboard your creativity, I have a variety of solutions for people like that. But yeah, for now, for this conversation, my wish is for you to enjoy my art check in with me online on social media, because I'm sharing these insights there and making it my mission to make the world just a little bit more peaceful, and to ask everybody to be working towards those priceless experiences just a little bit harder. And yeah, that's what it's about.